Bright and early next morning, he brought my letter.
Late in 1976, the California coast lay cold and grey beneath a moonless sky. Salt wind from the ocean whipped up white-tipped waves, smashing against the sheer cliffs as if to tear open the night. On a deserted coastal road, a convoy of Cadillacs slipped away from the blinding lights of the Los Angeles stage, headed toward the hotel in the deep of night. Elvis Presley sat in the back seat, head resting against the cold window, his weary eyes gazing at distant lights. That night, he had just finished a blazing performance, but his heart felt heavier than ever. The cheers, the applause, the dazzling stage only seemed to make Elvis feel more alone, more adrift than ever before. As the convoy wound along the twisting road, traffic suddenly came to a stop ahead. The driver slammed on the brakes, the screech slicing through the silence. Elvis. "Something's happening up ahead," his bodyguard said. In the distance, police lights flashed red and blue, and a crowd had gathered near the edge of the cliff. Without hesitation, Elvis opened the car door and stepped outside. Ignoring his bodyguard's grasp, the cold ocean wind struck his face. From afar, he could hear panicked murmurs, a woman's desperate cries, and a police officer calling out again and again, "Son, don't do it, please, it's going to be okay." Elvis pushed through the crowd. What he saw was a scene no one could forget. A young man, clad in a worn army jacket, hair disheveled, stood on the cliff's guardrail. His legs trembled, hands gripping the cold metal, vacant eyes gazing down at the black ocean below. His mother knelt in the dirt, sobbing and calling her son's name. A few men in civilian clothes, clearly fellow veterans, stood silent beside her, eyes red, as if they knew all too well the pain in that young man's gaze. Police kept their distance, afraid any sudden move might send him over the edge. No one dared move closer. Fear and helplessness filled the air. Elvis took in the scene, his eyes lingering on a long scar above the young man's brow. The silver badge still pinned to his jacket, a veteran, recently returned from Vietnam. Elvis felt a chill run down his spine, memories of letters from fans, tales of war, loss, and hopelessness. He approached a police officer and whispered, "Let me try to talk to him." The officer stared in surprise, suddenly recognizing Elvis Presley standing before him. "Mr. Presley, that's a dangerous spot," Elvis replied gently. "I know, but I've been on the edge before, too, just not the kind you can see." Without waiting for approval, Elvis stepped forward, keeping enough distance so as not to startle the young man. The wind howled, the silence almost unbearable. Elvis called out softly, his voice deep and calm, "Hey there, I'm Elvis. I'm not here to talk you out of anything. I just want to sit with you a while, if you'll let me." The young man flinched, glancing at him, his eyes hollow and wet. The crowd fell utterly silent, breathless at Elvis's appearance. No one dared interrupt. Only the sound of waves and wind filled the space. Elvis didn't come any closer. He stood there, hands in the pockets of his coat, his gaze gentle but unyielding. "You know, there were nights when I thought it was all over, too, that there was nothing left to hold on to. Sometimes, just a word, a song, or a stranger can be enough to keep us here." Tears rolled down the young man's cheeks. He whispered, his voice hoarse, "No one understands. No one needs me anymore." Elvis nodded, his own eyes shining with tears. "Maybe you don't believe it, but I understand more than you think." You're not alone. The waves crashed against the cliff, time suspended between them. That night, at the edge of life and death, two souls, one from glory, one from darkness, began to find each other. The sea wind howled around the cliff, laced with salt and a biting chill. The crowd behind remained silent, watching every movement of Elvis and the young man, as if even a whisper could break the fragile thread holding him to life. Elvis stood there, not rushing, not pleading, just a man facing another, stripped of fame and spotlight. His voice was gentle, filled with understanding. Son, I don't know everything you've been through, but I do know what it's like to feel so hopeless it seems no one in the world is listening. There were nights I stood on my own cliff's edge too. The young man gripped the rail, knuckles white, shoulders trembling. He shook his head, tears streaming down his face. I don't want to hurt my mother, but I'm so tired. All my friends died out there. I came back and I don't even know why. I can't sleep. I can't laugh. I can't find myself again. Elvis nodded, his own eyes brimming. He spoke, slow and careful. I lost my mother when I was 23. That was the greatest shock of my life. There were nights, even singing for thousands, I still felt utterly alone, like a lost ghost in the spotlight. I know the pain of not being able to share your sadness with anyone. The wind kept howling, carrying the mother's sobs behind them. Police held the line, no one daring to intrude on the sacred space. Elvis continued, his voice even softer. Music saved me, not because it made me famous, but because it let me say things I couldn't tell anyone. Do you have anything you want to say? If you need to cry, cry. If you need to yell, yell. Don't keep it all inside. The young man broke down, tears streaming, mixing with the sea's salty mist. He sat on the rail, head in his hands, breathing ragged. Elvis kept his distance, waiting patiently. No one hurried him. No one rushed, only the sound of waves, the wind, and a wounded soul's heavy breath. After a while, the young man whispered hoarsely, "Sometimes I wish I hadn't come back. Out there, at least my friends were with me. Here, I'm lost. No one understands. I thought, if I jumped, maybe I'd see them again." Elvis Sahil, his eyes kind. Sometimes, living on is its own kind of bravery. You survived where millions didn't, not because you're weak, but because you're strong. The moment hung, suspended. Suddenly, Elvis took a step back, then sat down on the ground, leaning against the cliff, facing the sea. He began to sing, no microphone, no band, just his voice in the night. There must be lights burning brighter somewhere. It was, "If I Can Dream," a song of hope in the dark. The melody carried out into the night, woven with the waves, pressing into every chest in the crowd. The young man grew still, tear pouring down. Slowly, he slipped off the rail and sat beside Elvis, head in his hands. When Elvis finished, he gently placed a hand on the young man's shoulder and said quietly, "Tonight, you're not alone. Tomorrow, things may not be perfect, but you were brave enough to stay. That's a real miracle." Behind them, the crowd erupted tears, applause, sobs. The mother rushed to embrace her son. Police gently guided them away from the edge. Elvis sat for a while longer, his eyes blurred. That night, on the edge between life and death, he had saved not just a life, but a soul. The next morning, The California coastline basked in gentle sunlight, washing away the chill of the night before. News of the strange event on the cliff made the front pages of local newspapers. Elvis Presley prevents suicide, a miraculous night on the edge. Television broadcasts replayed the moment Elvis sat and sang beside the young man, his voice mingling with the sound of waves, surrounded by a circle of silence and emotion. Thousands of letters poured into Graceland. Many were from war veterans, others from those who'd stood on their own brink of despair. One woman wrote, "I lost my son to depression last night. Seeing Mr. Presley sit and sing for that stranger, I wept." That's the image. I wish the world could see that sometimes compassion is stronger than any medicine. Editorials appeared everywhere, celebrating the power of listening, of art, of humanity. A columnist for the Los Angeles Times wrote, "Elvis Presley turned a life-or-death moment into a miracle. He didn't just save one life, he sent a message. Every lost soul deserves to be heard, to be held onto." For the young man, healing was not easy. After that night, he entered a hospital for psychological treatment. Elvis quietly sent flowers and letters of encouragement, always repeating, "You are not alone. Many have fallen into darkness and climbed out again. If you ever need someone to listen, I'll be here." The young man's mother, on a later television appearance, said through tears, "Elvis didn't just give my son a night, he gave him a second chance at life. Since that day, my son started keeping a journal, went to therapy, and slowly returned to living." A year later, on the anniversary of the event, the young man, now stronger, came with his mother to see Elvis at Graceland. No longer haunted by despair, he embraced Elvis and wept, "If not for you, I wouldn't be alive. I want to spend the rest of my life helping others like me." From then on, he volunteered for organizations supporting veterans and people with depression. The story of the night on the cliff was told in dozens of talks, inspiring countless others struggling with darkness. Later, when Elvis recalled that fateful night, he told friends, "I used to think I sang for millions, but that night, I sang for just one." Sometimes, saving a single soul is saving the world. Over the years, the story changed how society viewed those with psychological scars. No longer just pity or stigma, but real respect for the courage it takes to stay with life. Years later, at that same cliff, a small plaque was erected. Here, a song kept a life from slipping away. When despair meets compassion, miracle la peine. And to this day, whenever the waves crash against the cliff, people still whisper the story of the night Elvis saved a lost soul with nothing but his song and his heart. Years later, the memory of that midnight on the California cliff still lingered in the minds of all who witnessed it. For Elvis Presley, it was not just an unexpected event in a tumultuous life, but a turning point that reshaped how he saw himself and the mission of an artist. At Graceland, Elvis would sometimes sit quietly by the window, gazing into the garden where he so often pondered at dusk. He would remember that night, the stinging sea wind, the cries of despair, the hollow gaze of a young man standing between life and death. Elvis confided to close friends, "There were times when I was exhausted by fame, when everything I did seemed meaningless. But that night, I realized if I could just reach one soul, music would always have value." The Cliffside event inspired thousands of letters and hundreds of talks about the power of compassion and listening. Veteran support groups and organizations helping people with depression spoke of the moment Elvis sat with the young man, asking for no recognition, just offering a song and an outstretched hand. The young man went on to dedicate his life to helping others in despair. His and Elvis's story became the subject of articles, documentaries, and campaigns to raise awareness about mental health. In one televised interview, he said, "Sometimes, the one who saves you isn't a doctor, but a stranger patient enough to listen and kind enough to stay, even if only for a night." For many fans, that night changed the way they saw Elvis, not just as a music icon, but as a symbol of redemption, not through miracles, but through simple kindness. A journalist once wrote, "Elvis didn't save the whole world, but he saved someone's entire universe." Decade after decade, the story lives on the seaside cliff, where someone once nearly gave up everything. The small plaque, weathered now, still bears its message here. A song held onto a life. Never believe you're the last lonely soul in the world. As the sea winds still sweep that cliff, people softly sing, "If I Can Dream." A reminder that miracles are real in this life. Sometimes, a single word, a single song, a single hand can save a soul. That is Elvis's greatest legacy, far beyond every melody and every light. The legacy of compassion, connection, and the strength to stay together. Even in our darkest moments, on that fragile edge between despair and hope, Elvis didn't save the whole world. He simply stayed with one soul. Sometimes, miracles aren't born from the spotlight, but from a gentle song that's enough to keep someone holding on.